not from the date of application, from the date of issuance of your marriage certificate. Next, you can see that we have about 5 headings in this chapter. So we have finished 2: defining marriage and conditions of legal marriage. And I've entered into the third part of the chapter, the legal provisions. Void and voidable marriage. What are void and voidable marriage? Now, I've mentioned it in the class a couple of times that you need to understand the basic general meanings of a certain terminologies before understanding them in context. So void, in terms of a general meaning, would be sort of symbolic to the fact that certain thing is invalid from the time of its inception. It is invalid ab initio, meaning that it has no validity even if it happens. That is called as being void. Voidable is a situation in which something can be invalidated. It is not invalid prima facie or from its inception, but it can be invalidated if someone wants to invalidate it. That is the difference between void and voidable. You can read it for yourself to this certain case as presented in the slide. Conditions of void and voidable marriage in Nepal. When is marriage considered as void in Nepal? 2 particular things, like you saw the preconditions of marriage earlier on in the prior slides. So it is considered as void, particularly when the preconditions of marriage are not met, except the age limit. Which means that in our country, child marriage is a form of voidable marriage and not a form of void marriage under our law. You could, of course, give your opinions on whether it is correct to be called as voidable marriage or should it be totally void. But we must consider our social context before considering something as totally void or something as such, because it needs to fit to our social context. But nonetheless, you can of course express your opinions on whether child marriage should be void or a voidable form in our law. However, now going into what should be considered as voidable beyond void marriage, like I mentioned you just now, the first form of voidable marriage is, let's say, someone has done a marriage when they are low in age, below the age limit, which is below 20 years of age. Now it can be made as voidable if an action is instituted by any of the parties. When they become major or when they are minor in themselves, they can do it whenever. And the second condition under which it is considered as voidable is when it is concluded through misrepresentation. A misrepresentation is simply if someone is presenting a certain fact by saying it is true, or someone is not disclosing a fact that is to be disclosed, then it can be called as misrepresentation. Now we'll come into what are considered as misrepresentation, or what are the conditions of voidable marriage under Nepal. You can see it in this slide. See, if you're below age, like I mentioned you earlier on, if you already have a matrimonial relationship and you do not explain it to the person you're trying to marry, you have an incestuous relationship with them, or let's say there is no clear consent, or the other person is not capable of generating a clear consent, then it can be treated as misrepresentation as well. The first one is that. Second one is whenever a person has sort of contracted HIV or hepatitis B. When someone does not have a sexual organ, is impotent, has no reproductive capability, has leprosy. You can see all the reasons right here, and you can read by yourself. But you should, of course, understand the fact that despite these grounds are there to consider a marriage as being voidable, you must also understand the fact that if someone agrees to these facts, if someone wants to marry someone with these conditions and they consent to it freely, now then it cannot be considered as ground for making a certain relationship as being void. It can be called as a situation of being voidable because they have entered into a certain relationship by full conscience and they've accepted the other person as they are. So they cannot later on claim that I did not know of this or something like that when they have actually accepted the person with all these conditions. And people do accept people with a lot of conditions. So because it is like that, love is like that. So you accept people despite of whatever. No differences are differences anymore. So that's that. Let's just move on. So Tommy, we've come on to the final part of our chapter, which is pretty short. Termination of marriage. Now, when is a marriage deemed to be terminated? When is a marriage deemed to? Oh, if I forgot to tell you a certain fact. Now, you might be interested as to why child marriage was so rampantly prevalent during our yesteryears or in the ancient period, or even it is prevalent even now in our villages. And I found this very interesting uh, sort of very interesting passage from Nyaya Vikashini or Manav Nyaya Sastra, as you might have studied in history. So it mentions that a father must arrange. It is under page number 50. You can have a look at Nyaya Vikashini or Manav Nyaya Shastra for yourself. You'll find it very interesting with all its hierarchies and differences and whatever and other things. So under page 50 it mentions that a father must arrange for his daughter's marriage rituals before the first menstrual cycle, or else they would incur a great sin, which is just like the embryo killers as many times as a menstruation happens. So you can see a very strong line of assertion by our legal code by Jaisthiti Malla from our yesteryears or from our ancient period. You can see why child marriage is very much prevalent because it mentions that father is sort of an embryo killer whenever a unmarried girl is menstruating. So people marry their children pretty early to actually escape from that sort of stigma, or let's say to satisfy themselves or satisfy society or whatever. But we must judge these laws from the time and context. We must also not take us as totally aggressive. We must see it analytically, comparatively with other countries, say other civilizations, provisions of that time. However, from the purview of seeing it, or let's say from time and context right now, it is of course not acceptable. Furthermore, let's go into termination of marriage now. What is a marriage? When is a marriage deemed to be terminated? Now these are the conditions. They are mentioned in section 82. You can read it by yourself. Number one is if it is void or voided. Number two is if it is dissolved in accordance with law, which is called as divorce. We'll come to that. And the third one is when a wife concludes marriage before effecting divorce, meaning that when she gets married. Now this is pretty interesting. When a wife gets married to another man, the marriage or the union falls apart automatically. It falls apart automatically. But when a man gets married with another female, that is not the case. That is only a ground for divorce, but not termination per se. Because when divorce is in effect, there is termination of marriage. So this is only a ground for the wives, because when they marry another husband, if they marry another husband, it is to be taken as automatically terminating the marriage. But when the husband does the same, it is only a ground for claim for the female to take to the court to consider for marriage. We will come to that later on, which is also pretty interesting. Termination of marriage. How can you do it? These are the grounds of how can you do it, or the foundations on how it is to be done. You can read it by yourself as well here. Divorce is mentioned on the chapter 3. What could be the basis of divorce? They can do it by consent upon themselves. Parties may effect divorce on these certain grounds. So these are the common grounds, as mentioned in section 94 and 95, upon which someone can claim for getting a divorce. One is if each of the parties have lived without consent of each other for 3 or more years, if one of them expels each other from the house, deprives of maintenance. This is a tacit recognition of the fact that a female can also deprive a man of maintenance. They can expel someone from their house. The provision being sort of negative, but sort of a progressive step, I guess, in recognizing the fact that a female can expel a man from their house, and they can also deprive a man of any maintenance that they would need. Third, if someone tries, each of the parties, the wife and the husband, tries to cause grievous hurt or conspires against them, each other, to cause grievous hurt or severe physical or mental pain. Now, grievous hurt is under a criminal code regarded as sort of hurt that is of high level, let's say, which causes a lot of damage, like let's say damage to the eyes. Like there's certain categorization of grievous hurt under criminal code. It is damage to your eyes, or damage to your hearing abilities, sort of things like that, which would cause sort of irrevocable damage, are considered as grievous hurt under criminal code. So if they try to do that, it can also be taken as a ground for wanting to have a divorce. This is a common ground. The fourth one is if any of the parties is proved to have had sex with another person. So with regards to another person, only the opposite gender is mentioned. So if male does it with another female, or if the female does it with another male. So I don't know what would be the case if it's with the same gender. Termination of marriage on common ground. So you can see this, the thing that I mentioned earlier on, that whenever a wife would marry another male, the marriage is automatically terminated. But however, according to section 95, if a wife finds out that her husband has concluded another marriage, it is not automatic termination of marriage, but this becomes a ground to claim for divorce. It is not automatically terminated.